I started to use EFT every day. So I started to notice when I was becoming emotional. So when we say we're feeling frustrated, what we're really doing is describing the tension that we're holding our body. We're holding it in a particular posture, and we give that the name frustration.
Welcome to the Be Better broadcast. Listen, we've talked to many people on this show who talk about releasing trauma and what is trauma? How do you release it? How can you feel better about some difficult situations that have occurred in your life? And some of us have very difficult situations. Someone like me, I've had difficulty in my life, but I haven't lost anyone close to me in my life. And I know that many of you listening have lost people close to you, and it's affected everyone in different ways. And those who I've had on the show to talk about trauma, they always say that all of us have experienced what they call trauma in some different way in our life, whether it's from inception to the birth, to when we were young children, to our adolescence, to adulthood, whatever it might be. We all have some level of trauma. And even if we don't realize it at the subconscious level, that trauma is affecting us and the way that we interact with the world professionally, personally, with our family, with our work, with our careers, all the different areas. So what would your life look like if you could release some of these traumas? Maybe these traumas that you didn't even realize were there. Well, today we're going to be talking about a 3-step system that is going to be illustrated to you by Hince, who is our guest today on the show. And I'm going to introduce you to Ann here in just a second. But if this conversation helps you in any shape, way, or form, all that we ask is you share this show with just one other person who could use it as well. We don't run sponsors. We don't run ads because we don't want to interrupt your viewing experience. And we want to keep this as pure as possible on the Be Better broadcast. So thank you for being the best part of the Be Better team. So before I introduce you to Ann, for those who don't know Ann Hince, when she was 19, she woke up one morning to find her mother dead in her bathroom. 20 years later, the tears from that trauma were still just under the surface. Ann found a simple technique that helped her to release these emotions, but she went even further and can now put her awareness inside of her body and has changed the bone structure of her skull and has even grown 3/4 of an inch at age 56. That's wild. Ann has found that seeking out our truth, what we truly feel, and accepting those feelings is the key to inner peace. So without further ado, let's talk to Ann Hince, all the way from England, even though you live in California. And it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Brandon. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. Thanks for making the time. I know you share your story a lot, and you've got your book, you have a workbook to accompany it. And for those who want to check out that book, the name of Ann's book is A Pathway to Insight, and your workbook guides people through that. And I'm sure it guides them through those 3 steps as well, some of which we touched on in the introduction. But Ann, I'd like to dive in right away here, and I'd like to ask you, okay, so you found your mother dead when you were 19 years old, okay? You're still a teenager at that point, right? Did you expect this situation to happen? Can you maybe guide me through the series of events around this if you're comfortable doing so?
Sure. My mother was an alcoholic, serious alcoholic. She would drink a bottle of sherry a day, and she basically pickled herself. But in that process, she was diagnosed with cancer. So she had throat cancer from smoking, throat and lung cancer from smoking and drinking. So we'd been told that there wasn't anything that we could do that could be done about it. It was too far along, but we thought we had 6 months or so, and it didn't last that long. It was very sudden. It happened overnight. And so I had been out the night before with friends. I'd actually argued with her before I went out, and I came back and went to bed. And then the next morning I woke up and she was deceased in the bathroom, which was a big shock. I was the only one in the house at the time. My brother was at his girlfriend's house. My dad was working in Saudi Arabia at the time. So, that was part of the trauma, as being there on my own and not knowing what to do in that situation.
Yeah, you grew up real fast in that moment, especially after, like you mentioned, arguing the night before. You probably had these feelings of, oh my God, those were the last words, all these different things. And these emotions and feelings, you say, stayed with you for 2 decades after this event. Did you know in that moment, like, were you changed in that moment? Like, tell me about Anne before that moment and then Anne after that moment, if you will.
Well, and we get programmed in childhood as to how to deal with those kind of things. You know, our parents deal with those kind of things a certain way, and we tend to pick that up. And my family had not dealt with anything. We never talked about anything deep. We never talked about emotions or anything like that. So I just carried on the way I had before because I didn't know what else to do. I'd never heard of therapy before. I didn't know it existed. So there wasn't probably a lot different other than I lost the glue that held the family together, which I think a lot of times the mother is that glue. So it felt like this family disintegrated at that point. But I was in university at the time, and I went back to university and kind of carried on, not knowing that I was storing all this inside and it was affecting me, but I didn't know it.
You didn't know that these emotions were inside affecting you in your everyday life. Like, give me an idea. How did this, for those, the only reason I ask is because other people are in this exact same situation, maybe the exact same situation, but maybe even one very close to it. How did this affect you first, even though you didn't know it at the time?
Well, I don't really know how it affected me first. I mean, it was traumatic and I didn't know what to do with life. And it was really weird to kind of have to carry on with life and yet feel like life had disintegrated. It was tricky at that point. But I also had multiple other traumas. So, it was all connected. I had PTSD from my dad's anger from both parents were alcoholics. So, one would start drinking at lunchtime, one would start drinking in the middle of the afternoon. So I can never trust anything they said because they'd say something in the morning and then it would be different by the evening. And my dad had serious anger, short fuse for his anger. So, that was all combined into what I was dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And it was all stored inside and it was all affecting me. And I was just scared all the time. I was scared of doing something wrong, not being good enough, all those beliefs that we tend to take on from those kind of situations.
So you felt this fear, you felt this collapse of the family structure that you had before. And you say that it took 2 decades in order to become conscious of the fact that these emotions were stored inside of your body.
Yeah, we just suppress it and we have no idea. I had no idea that it was affecting me. And I had to go through something to kind of spark that realization. And
What was that?
Yeah, for me, it was what I call a business altercation with a couple of other mothers. They were mothers at my boys' school, and these women were not like me. They were self-confident, self-assured, authority-type women. And they told me, the scared mother on the inside, they told me I'd done something wrong. And my mind just spun out of control. It just went over and over what I had done, what they thought was wrong, what they said, what I said, what I could have done differently, all those different permutations. And I couldn't stop my mind spinning for about 3 days. And it was at the end of that time, I realized 2 things. First of all, this is not normal. Most people don't react this intently to something that really wasn't a big deal. And I also realized it was a little bit like how I reacted when my dad would tell me I'd done something wrong. So for me, that was the little opening that, maybe my childhood is still affecting me to this day.
Wow. Okay, so you had this altercation with these other women, these other mothers, and you reacted in a way that was sparked from these subconscious emotions that have been repressed for all these years. So, okay, so you realize I don't want to feel like this anymore because of this situation. So this situation, it sounds like, was very much the catalyst for you saying, I want to figure out how to move forward and release these emotions. Was it that language? Like, did you realize it was emotions that you wanted to release? How did you even come to the realization? And how did you find the strategies in order to release these suppressed emotions?
Yeah, I really, really wanted to change. I knew I had to be different because my boys were young and they were going to grow up. And I didn't want to be this scared, reactive mother on the inside. So I knew I had to change, but I didn't know how. And it was in that time frame I happened to go to a doctor's appointment. And he was a holistic physician, so he had more tools in his toolbox than many other doctors do. He was also a parent at my boys' school. So he knew my situation at home shouldn't have been particularly stressful because I was a stay-at-home mother with 2 young, healthy boys.
Mm.
But he could tell I was more stressed than I should be. And he asked me on a scale of 0 through 10 how stressed I was. And I said 8. And
Hmm.
then why? And it was that question that made me realize, oh, it was finding my mother dead on the bathroom floor when I was 19, because the tears from that event were still just under the surface. I was spending so much energy trying to keep those tears down that I didn't realize how much it was kind of bubbling out in my life. And he happened to know this technique that's called EFT, which is
Mm.
for emotional freedom technique, or tapping. Because it's called tapping because we're tapping on our body as we're talking something through. Are you familiar with it, by the
I've
way?
heard of it. I've never gone through it, but I've heard of it and I've seen it in action.
Okay, so he tapped with me for about 15 minutes about my mother's death. And I walked away from that appointment being able to tell the story in my mind for the first time ever without the tears there. And that's when I realized how we just hold those emotions and those memories in our physical body,
Yeah.
and that we can let them go. I had no idea to that point that that was possible.
Yes, absolutely. Well, emotions are very physical themselves. I mean, we experience emotions physically. I'd like to ask you, when you said 8 out of 10 on the scale when it comes to stress, especially if there's a lot of people out there who might not even be identifying that they are stressed or have this emotion in their body and they're manifesting it on a daily basis. How did you know it was 8 out of 10? Like, how did stress manifest itself in your physical experience?
I was always very tense. I was very reactionary, very jumpy, like highly strung. So I think anyone who is like that has a lot of stress in their life, even if they're not aware of it. And that's, that was part of my journey, is like realizing how much is stored in our subconscious mind. So, if you know that you've been through some stress in your life, it's probably still stuck inside, and it's worth looking at least.
Wow, very interesting. Okay, so you were fortunate to find this holistic doctor. Did you have any intention on going to a holistic doctor, or did you just kind of end up at the doorstep to one that had these extra tools in their toolbox?
Well, he was my doctor.
Okay.
And I wasn't going to him. I can't remember why I was going to him. It was nothing to do with mental health. It was nothing to do with any of this. He just happened to recognize that I was stressed. So I was very fortunate from that point of view. And I was ready. I was looking for something that would work. And, this technique worked so quickly in that instance. Now, I had to do more work on my mother's death, right? That was just the surface layer of the emotions that we accessed that day. So I had to do more on it, but it made such a difference so quickly that I went home that day and I learned everything I could about the technique, because it was given away by Gary Craig for free. So anyone can go online and learn how to use it.
Wow.
And I wanted to check it out because I used to be a software engineer. So I have that kind of mind. I don't want to waste my time on something that's not going to work. So I had a 17-year-old cat at home at the time.
Wow.
And we were told he needed to have daily saline shots, like injections, because his kidneys were starting to fail. And the first time I gave him a shot, my hand was shaking so badly. I was so scared of giving him the shot. So I thought, okay, let me try out this technique. Let me see if it works the way it did, when I was at the doctor's office. So I did. I tapped about it. I tapped about hurting my cat. So I tapped about every aspect: hurting my cat. I tapped about my hand shaking. I tapped about all the memories from all the injections I had had as a child. And the next day, when I gave him that shot, the needle just slid right in. All the fear that had been living inside of me the day before had totally disappeared. And
Wow.
that's when I realized how powerful it really is.
That is, I got to look into EFT more myself. So EFT is something that people can look up, learn, and use on themselves, even without seeing a professional.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, there are professionals out there. I would
Yeah.
say if you're looking at YouTube videos, a lot of EFT practitioners have moved towards the positive, right? They tap on the positive, but it's not the positive that's stored in the body. It's the negative that's stored
Mm.
in the body. So with EFT, we're actually tapping on our truth. So if we're feeling really lousy, we tap on feeling really lousy, right? If we made a mistake, we tap on the mistake we made. We're finding our truth and we're tapping on that negative. And the EFT, the tapping itself releases that energy from the nervous system of the body. So
Wow.
then it becomes, you come back more to peace. So if you are frustrated, you will release the frustration and come back to peace. So that's the power of it.
That's amazing. Cool. So we're already 15 minutes in and we've already got a very powerful strategy for people. So I'll include links down there. You said the gentleman's name is Daniel Craig. Is that correct?
Gary Craig.
Gary Craig. I think Daniel Craig is James Bond. So, okay. Gary Craig. Okay. I'll include that information in the description for people listening. That's great. So let me tell you who I see when I look at you. Okay. I see someone who is very self-assured. I see someone who's very energetic. I see someone who's very positive, right? You got a smile on your face. You're very, very positive when you talk about these different strategies and things. So I'm guessing this wasn't you before you began to share your story and go through this self-transformation. Am I correct in that?
Oh, absolutely. I would not have been here if I hadn't done this work.
How fast was that transformation from the moment that you visited this doctor? He gave you these different tools. You began to feel comfortable sharing your story. How long did it take from then to get to this energetic state? Not necessarily where you are now, because you've continued to grow and develop, but how quickly was this transformation for you, would you say?
Well, let me just say what I started to do. So I started to use EFT every day. So I started to notice when I was becoming emotional during the day. And that's the first step for everyone. Unless we can stand back and say, okay, look at me, I'm starting to get frustrated or angry or sad or whatever it is. Once we can do that, then we can work on it. But if we're still caught up in that emotion, if we're being frustrated and taking it out on someone, we can't do anything about it. So I would start noticing during the day when I was feeling something, and then I would tap about it. And as the weeks went by, I noticed that I started to become more calm during the day. I was just a calmer person, but I wanted to go faster. I could see things changing and I was determined to make it go faster. So what I did is I wrote down every emotional memory I could think of from my childhood. So all the big traumas, all the little traumas, all the beliefs, all the embarrassments, all the humiliations, all the teasing, all those things from childhood. And I tapped through one each night for about an hour to an hour and a half each night. And over that period of months, and I don't have an exact time frame for you, but it was definitely multiple months.
Yeah.
I started to become peaceful. My mind, which had been very negative and very judgmental and very critical, became quiet. And I had never experienced that before. I didn't know that was peace. But I couldn't tell until I got to that place where my mind was peaceful. I couldn't tell that those phrases, that criticism, that those judgments, they were phrases that my dad had used, that had been programmed into me, and I would use them over and over again. I couldn't see that until I'd let them go and could look back on it and see that that was the case.
Wow. And throughout this process, this is you going on your journey through those 3 steps that we're going to talk about. Is that correct?
This
With
is just the
tapping is a
first
big
step.
piece of it. This
Tapping
is
was
the
the first step.
Okay. So I'd like to skip to the end here real quick. And I know that, so we're going to the last page of the book. I'm just curious to understand, why is it that now you have your book? Why is it that now you share your story? Like what are you out there to accomplish in the world by sharing your story?
Because we are so incredibly powerful. I had no idea that what I can do now was a thing, was that something we could do. I'd never heard of it before. So I wanted to tell people that we can do this and show them how to do it. Because I mean, it still blows my mind every day when I'm doing this work that I can hear and feel adhesions in my connective tissue, in my bones. I can feel it release. So if we could all do this, I think we can change the world.
That's amazing. So if you went back to Anne at 19, 20 years old, how would this have changed your life / her life? If we dissociate here, how would this have changed her life? When you're looking back, what would have been different in your life had you known these things 20 years earlier?
Life would be more fun. I mean, there is so much depth to life that I'm aware of now that I didn't know existed back then. So if I'd have done this work back then, life would be totally different. Yes, it would have been fun.
Do you believe at the same time that the hardships that you went through and that 2 decades of stress and fear, as you mentioned earlier, do you believe that that set you up to understand the flip side of what you experience now at the same time? So I guess the question is it necessary and even important to feel the pain and feel those emotions in order to understand what beauty or the other side even looks like? The reason I ask that is because you went through 2 decades of turmoil in a way to now be sharing your story to help all these people, to have your book. Like, you wouldn't be doing that if that event didn't happen at 19, if you didn't go on that 20-year journey. Do you understand what I'm asking?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I believe that those of us who have a lot of trauma in childhood, we're the ones who seek out the journey to release that, right? So we're the ones who are likely to go deeper, maybe into spirituality or something like that, because we've had that experience in childhood. So one of the biggest takeaways for me that I realize is that those emotions, those memories, are just energy that is stuck in the body. So we don't have to attach to them. We need to work through it, but it's just energy and we can release it. So that's a huge part of the understanding that can allow anyone to release it. And I think it helps with when you've got children as well, and you start to realize that, okay, they're on this journey of their own. And really, it doesn't matter how much trauma they have, because those that are going to have the most trauma are going to be the ones that are going to search out the most healing. So in some ways, it can make it easier to let your children be as they are, not be, helicopter parents. Just allow them to have their experiences and know that the trauma they're getting in their life, it's just energy that's stuck in the body, and it can be released when they're ready. Of course, they're not always ready when we want them to be ready.
Have these teachings helped you when it comes to parenting your 2 boys? Because when you started this journey of self-transformation, how old were your 2 boys, roughly?
They were roughly 6 and 10, something like that.
Oh, so they were still very young. Okay. And how did these transformations for yourself, how did it affect them, if it did at all?
Well, it did in a couple of ways. I could use the technique on them. So if they were having some kind of nightmare or something, I would tap on them to release it. But mostly it was working on me. And one of the other traumas I had was when I was 9 to 11, I was sent to my brother's boarding school, which is a boys' boarding school.
Wow.
So the first year, I was the only girl boarder. So there were some day girls that would go home at the end of the day, but then I was left with all the boys, and I was teased mercilessly. So I did not like boys in the age range of 9 to 13. So
Yeah.
I had to get over that before my boys got to that age.
Wow.
Because I was afraid of boys at that age. So I knew I had to do that. So I did all that work. I did, the EFT on those experiences at that school, and released that trauma, that energy, so that I was more peaceful on the inside. I didn't mind boys that age. So changing myself brought me more to peace. And then my family was a reflection of that. So yes, the household became more peaceful.
Very fascinating. Okay, so let's talk about these 3 steps that you've taken to release these traumas. So we're on step 1 right now that we're talking about, okay? And this has to do with, this incorporates the tapping and releasing the emotions. So how do you define what step 1 is, and how does one begin that phase?
Well, step 1 was what we talk about. It's using EFT and going through traumas. If you want to go fast, you would go through your traumas from your childhood, or you could just use it on a day-to-day basis. Whenever you were reacting to something, you could release that energy and come back to peace, and then carry on with your day. But what I realized EFT is doing is it's opening up the subconscious mind. So for example, like with my mother's death, the first time I tapped on it was just releasing the surface layer emotions, the surface story. And as I did more and more tapping, more details of the story would come to mind that had been hidden underneath those emotions. So that's what happens. It's opening up of the subconscious mind. Along with that, at the same time, it's kind of one and the same thing. Our awareness deepens, our self-awareness deepens. We become more aware of ourselves. So I became more aware of my emotions that I hadn't been aware of before. So I could name my emotions. Like a lot of us, when someone asks us how we're doing, we'll just say, we're okay, we're fine, because we don't want to really look inside and notice how we're feeling. So over time, I became aware of those emotions. Now, there's another layer underneath that, which are the physical sensations underneath the emotions. So when we say we're feeling frustrated, what we're really doing is describing the tension that we're holding our body. We're holding it in a particular posture, and we give that the name frustration. But we can become aware of it. So for me, frustration is tension across my solar plexus. So when I became aware of that level of self-awareness, I didn't need to tap anymore. Didn't need to use EFT. I could just focus on the sensations themselves. Wow. Now I could have tapped about this frustration I can feel in my solar plexus, or I could just focus on the tension in my solar plexus.
Yeah.
So that's what I started doing. That's what I call step 2. I call it feeling your feelings, which is kind of an obvious name, but it's not as easily done as it is said.
Feeling your feelings, feeling them and how they manifest in your body, and being aware of that. So you mentioned that not everyone can participate in step 2. Do you believe that is because, why do you believe that is, that not everyone can participate in feeling their feelings?
Well, I couldn't when I started. I was not aware of my feelings. So you have to, or I had to at least release enough tension, enough of those traumas, so I could notice my emotions and then notice the physical sensations. Because it was stuck in my subconscious mind. It was there all along. I had just had all these emotions that were holding that awareness away from me.
So now that you're aware of how this emotion is manifesting itself physically, you mentioned your solar plexus and you've got that tension there. Is your goal to immediately eliminate that tension? Like, what is your goal once you now recognize, okay, my body, I'm holding myself this way and I'm feeling this way physically. What do you do next?
Okay, so that is what I call this feeling your feelings. And it's not just mental. There's a physical aspect to it as well, because it's just energy that is stuck in the body. It's energy that we've suppressed. We've never allowed it to be felt. So the first time I did this, I was standing at the kitchen sink doing the dishes, and I noticed a thought that had some emotion around it. So it could be something as simple as, I'm afraid of making this phone call. And I would notice where that fear was inside of me. So it would be fear also for me is more in my stomach area. So I would notice where that fear was, and I would stop. I would hold myself like a statue, because I realized if I took a deep breath, or if I moved even, I would lose my focus on that tension. Now, when I say focus, I'm not talking about thinking about it. I'm talking about feeling it. So if I tell you right now, how does your right knee feel? You put your focus on your right knee.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm doing by feeling the fear in my stomach. I would hold myself like a statue and I would talk to it. I would say things like, okay, I can feel you, fear, sitting right there in my solar plexus. I just want to feel you. I want to allow you to be felt. Just focus on that feeling. And at some point, obviously, I'd have to take a deep breath. And then I would think the thought again. I'm afraid of making this phone call. I would notice that the fear had diminished slightly.
Wow.
So then I would do it again. Same thought, same fear, slightly less fear. I would talk to it, hold myself like a statue. And at some point, have to take a deep breath, and it would have diminished again. And I would keep doing that over and over again until the fear had disappeared.
Awareness. You would simply be aware of this sensation. You wouldn't necessarily say, I need to get rid of this. I need to not feel fear. This needs to go away. How can I do it? You simply, the awareness itself was the draining of that emotion.
Right. Now, obviously, the ultimate goal is to release it. That's why we're doing this. But it needs to be felt and just accepted. And because it's been suppressed for so long, it's hard to do. I mean, it sounds like it should be so easy to do, but it wants to be hidden because it's just been hidden for so long. So actually, to allow it to be felt takes some practice. But it gets easier as you do it more and more. And that's when you really come to terms, okay, it's really just stuck energy. It needs to be felt, acknowledged, accepted, not try to change, just acknowledged, accepted, felt, and it will release.
Wow. Okay, so step one is the beginning of this self-awareness where we can, and everyone can do this right now. We can sit down and we can write down even the smallest micro traumas from our childhood. Maybe this, a girl said something to us, or we were rejected, or our parents told us we can't sing, or the coach told me I'm not athletic, so I never played sports again, or whatever it might be. These micro traumas, we can write them down, right? You don't need to write down the book about them. You don't need to write a story. You can, but write down even just a few words so that you know what this event is. And then practice this EFT tapping, right? Practice this to release and bring self-awareness to these emotions and these feelings. That's phase one. Phase two is then, and just recapping what you said, you having that awareness of this fear or this feeling maybe in your stomach when you're about to make that phone call, or the tension in your solar plexus, or wherever this anxiety or stress is living inside of your body. Step two is where you can feel that and begin to speak to it and begin to bring awareness to it and release it in that way by simply bringing awareness without even tapping. Okay, so how long did it take you, did you find, roughly, to get to stage two from stage one?
Probably about 2 years, I'm thinking, maybe.
Okay.
Which might sound like a long time, but it's not. Because things change along the way, and you start realizing how much of a fun journey it is because you start noticing the changes. So yeah, it's a good journey.
It's almost like a spiritual maturation, if that's even a word, like a spiritual maturity that you are gaining through the years of doing this, right? Because this is really, in a way, it's emotional work, it's physical work, but really at the same time, it's spiritual work, right? And that's not a religious thing. That's simply you're growing yourself, you're growing in your emotional awareness. And really, if you read all these books from Eckhart Tolle and all these other people out there, he talks about us not being this ego or this identity that we give ourselves, or this physical meat sack that we're walking around the earth in, but really as what you described as awareness. The awareness of that emotion is what and who we are, right? And the more you can bring awareness to that, the more you can realize that you are the observer that is observing these emotions and observing this physical body and observing these thoughts, then the sooner you can reach what a lot of people might call spiritual enlightenment, right? Whatever that might mean for you. So I'm curious. Okay, so we've, a couple years, you've reached the second stage, right? What is the third step to this that you said you haven't found someone else who has reached this step? What is that? What does that look like?
Okay, so with the step two, with the feeling your feelings, I had already worked on my childhood. So at this point, I worked on more collective traumas. So I would think about memories like 9/11, like the Loma Prieta earthquake. We've all had our own individual experience of those collective traumas. So I would lay on the sofa at night. Instead of doing the EFT, now I'm doing the feeling your feelings. And I would lay on the sofa, bring these memories to mind, and allow the energy that had been stuck inside to release. Felt really good because it was energy that had been stuck inside for so long. But at some point, I noticed I could keep my awareness inside my body after the energy had released, which was really weird. I'd never heard of it before. I didn't know what I was doing. It was just very different. So let me see if I can try and explain it to you. So imagine you have a toothache or a stomachache. You can pinpoint with your mind or with your awareness where that pain is coming from, right? You can feel inside the tooth, or you can feel the stomachache. But once the pain is gone, you can't put your awareness there anymore. There's nothing calling your attention to it, right? I found that I could keep my awareness inside after, for example, the pain had left. And I didn't know what I was doing. I've done it once. Can I do it again? And I realized I could. And then, well, now what? So I started to play with it. And I realized I could move my awareness around inside. And I could feel a place with tension compared to a place with no tension. So I'd find a place with tension. I would hold my awareness on it. So just feel it exactly the same that I was doing with the feeling and the feelings. But now I'm on the tension inside the body. Hold my focus there long enough, and I would feel it release. And then I would do it over and over and over again until it was all gone. So I was like working around the body, moving releasing this tension in different places. And eventually, and it took many, many months again, I wish I had written a diary down, but eventually I got inside my head. And that was huge because the pain and the tension inside my left cheek was almost unbearable.
Wow.
And I realized that that pain had been there since I was born. I was born with my right foot up against my right shin, and my whole body was torqued. I have scoliosis. So whether it started in my cheek or whether that's just part of it, but it's all connected down. And that pain had been there at that point 50 years, but I had no awareness of it. Whoa. Until I was ready to be shown it, right? Until my depth of awareness was deep enough that I could go inside there and feel that tension.
Fascinating. So stage 3 was bringing awareness to wherever you decide to in your body, even if there was nothing calling your attention to that part of your body. So what motivated you to even place your awareness into your head? Were you just like, I'm going to place awareness into my head during this session? And then you did. And then you noticed the healing of this side of your face. Is that how it went down?
Well, I would always go to the place that called my attention. So the places to begin with were always in my torso. And at some point, I was drawn to put my awareness inside my head. And that's when I became aware. So it's like a layer by layer process. You know, we hear about that, the layers of the onion. And most of my layers were not in my head, right? The deeper layers were in my head. So by the time I got inside of my head, I had this technique, right? So I knew I could focus on it. And to begin with, I could only focus for like a second at a time. But I would just do it over and over again, and it would release. Eventually, a little bit more would release. At some point, I actually heard and felt something release, and it sounded and it felt like old fabric ripping. Wow. That was a little scary at the time. I didn't know what it was. I went home and looked it up. I tried to research what was going on, and I realized it was an adhesion in the connective tissue that was releasing. So I thought, okay, not hurting myself. I can continue. So I did. I would just release more and more, and eventually got to the place where I could actually feel my skull bones relax. Now, I had not known they were not relaxed before, right? Until they relaxed, and then I could look back and say, okay, yeah, they were relaxed, clearly. I mean, they were tense, clearly. So, you know, at some point I had x-rays taken just as part of my orthodontic routine, whatever. And I could actually see the changes in my skull from 8 years prior and see that my eye sockets had aligned and my jaw used to be way off to the side and it's much more centered now. And my neck is straighter than it has ever been in my life. And because of that release of tension, the release of the burden, I have grown 3/4 of an inch.
Wow. For those just listening, it's true. Anna's very symmetrical. So I know what you looked like before then.
I've got a lot more to go, believe me.
Wow. Okay. You just said a lot of very, some might say, miraculous things there. So you mentioned, in short, that this awareness that you brought to your body actually resulted in physical changes and shifts in your bones. So at the molecular level, you are shifting your physical body simply, and maybe not simply because it took years to get here, but simply by placing awareness on different parts of your body, you were able to create physical shifts without a scalpel, without surgery, without medications. This is simply through the power of your awareness. Wow. Okay, so you're shifting your skull bones. You mentioned that you grew 3/4 of an inch. Like, is that in terms of your height? Is that because of the scoliosis and you straighten up more? Like, what's that? What's that all about?
Well, it's kind of all of that. But one of the things I realized early on is anytime I'm releasing tension anywhere in the body, it also releases in my neck all the time. So we have so much tension in our neck that we are just not aware of. So the whole process, every time I release, it's like I have an internal chiropractor, and my neck will crack, you know, I would say maybe 50 times a day as I'm releasing tension. You know, now I'm releasing tension deep in my bones and my palates and my jaw bones. And every time it releases, something in my neck also releases. So if you see photos of young people versus them when they're older, it's often the neck that is shrunk. And people tend to lose height at that, you know, as they age. And I think this is reversing that process.
Very interesting. This is very new. I've never had someone talk about this kind of stuff on the show before. Okay, great. So you went through these 3 phases. All right, here we are today. It's 2023. How do you practice these methods today? Like what does this look like? Is it throughout the day? Is it a specific part of your day? You mentioned you lay on your couch and you think about collective traumas. Like what does this look like today? How do you use these?
Okay, that's a great question. So over time, as I said, it feels really good. So I actually do it every day, many, many times a day, mostly when I'm on my own. Anytime I'm left on my own, it's almost like the unwinding of a wheel that has been wound up. So the energy is ready to release whenever I'm going to put my awareness on it. So sometimes I'll even wake up in the night and crack my neck because the energy is kind of released and it needs to be let go. So yeah, many, many times during a day. And I will sometimes use EFT still if I'm watching something on the news that still has some emotion there, or some program that's scary. I will tap as I'm watching it to allow that energy to release. So that's how I do it many, many times a day. And deep, I mean, the work I'm doing is so, as I said, it still blows my mind. I'm working inside the bones and in the palate and just releasing tension in there. So that's why I know I've still got a lot more to do, because there's still a lot of tension in there.
Wow. I can't wait to talk to you in 5 years to hear where you are at that point. This is amazing. You might simply be spirit at that point in a great way. And I don't know how we'll do the podcast, but that's super cool.
So let me add something in there if it's okay.
Please.
So what I believe from this experience in trying to work the words with the society and the words we use in society, I believe that I am looking through the connective tissue because I'm sensing inside. I believe that's where our soul resides, and releasing this tension is allowing the soul to be freed up in this body, so it's much more comfortable in this body. Because I think once our soul gets so tied up in our body that's so uncomfortable, that's when it decides to leave. So I believe that this is kind of reversing that process and making us very comfortable in this body so that we will remain in the body for longer.
That makes sense to me. That sounds like it makes sense 100%. So let me ask you, along this journey, how has your overall nutrition and or your movement and or the care of your body overall, how has it changed? Did it change at the beginning? Did it change throughout? Like in terms of you now versus even Anne 5 years ago, how has the overall care for your body changed?
Okay, that's a great question too. So those years prior to finding EFT, I did many, many different dietary changes. I was light food, I was vegan, macrobiotic, many, many different things, all trying to make myself feel better. Nothing really worked for very long. And then I started this journey and I started releasing all the restrictions, right? Because we do a lot of that because of fear. So we think there's something wrong with eating a particular thing, which keeps us away from it. So we're cutting off part of life by doing that. So as time went by, I released those restrictions. So now I will eat many, many different things, but I keep to healthy. I love organic food. I will always try and have organic if I can, but I don't stop myself eating things, right? If there's something I'm stopping myself eating that I would like to eat, maybe I'll tap about it, right? What's the fear? What's the fear? And release the fear. And then maybe once the fear has released, I might choose to have it or might choose not to have it, but I'm not being controlled by the fear.
Yeah. So you found that you can feel the way that you want to feel while still eating, in moderation, of course, the things that you enjoy and want to eat. You're not restricting yourself, but you can still feel great in the process.
Yes.
Huh.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very interesting. I wanted to ask because I was curious how those changes may have affected your overall evolution through this process. And that does describe it very well. Okay, so we talked about where you are now and what you do now to practice this in your life. Now we've got someone listening who says, I want to begin with step 1. I'm going to look at the EFT. I'm going to begin that. What might a daily practice or exercise look like for someone who is at the very beginning of this journey? What would you give? What advice would you give someone who's at the very beginning, as if you were coaching them one-on-one right now?
I would have them start noticing during the day. Just see if you can notice when you're becoming emotional, when you're being triggered by something. Just notice. right? Until you can do that, you can't do anything else. So that's always the first step. But
Is there a
then,
good way to notice? Like, do you make an alarm on your phone to go off that says notice yourself? Like, how do you go about doing that? Is there a way to go about it?
you could put a notice on your mirror or your bathroom door or something. It's like, how am I feeling now? And
Mm,
that's what I would start doing. I would start asking myself, how am I feeling now? And do I want to keep feeling this way? And most of the time, the answer would be, I don't want to feel this way. And so then I would do something about it. And that's when I would tap.
got it. So cool. It reminds me of Rhonda Byrne's book, The Secret. She has a line in the book, and I still remember to this day. It says, "Remember to remember," and she means remember how you are feeling at any given moment, right? And the more you can remember to ask yourself, "How am I feeling?" That sparks awareness in itself. So you've talked about the law of attraction in your work. What are your overall thoughts on the law of attraction? And is it intertwined with the work that you've done on yourself?
Absolutely, yes. I was determined to work out how the law of attraction worked because people talked about it, but I tried the positive thinking, I tried different things, and nothing seemed to really work. So as I started down this journey, I really, really wanted to understand it. And, it's throughout the journey that my understanding came that we are a signal. The whole of us is a signal. It's not just our thoughts, it's everything about us. It's our size, our shape, our gender, our hair, our clothes. All of that is part of our signal. And it's obvious when you think about it, right? Because if I shaved all my hair off now and I went out, I would get a different reaction back from the people I know than I would currently. So everything about us is part of that signal. But what I realized when I could put my awareness inside, how much our past, the tension inside of us, is a huge part of our signal. That's why things don't change for so many people, because that tension inside of my head was massive, unbelievably intense, but I had not been aware of it. So I had to go inside and release that in order for my signal to be very much more at peace and joyful, so that I would get that back to me, because I believe we're emitting a signal and we're attracting back into our future based on the signal that we are, how we're being right now. So in order to change the future, we have to change the signal that we're emitting right now. And I don't believe it's the thoughts. I believe most of it is that tension we hold inside from our past.
Wow. Can someone go right to the part where they bring awareness to their body, or do you recommend and or believe everyone should start with learning tapping? Because of course tapping is one way to go about things, but can we begin by placing attention on maybe the tension in our head or in our body or whatever it might be? Can we kind of skip to a different step? What have you seen from your experience with people that you've worked with?
We can try, but most of the time we do not have enough awareness to do that. Plus, words are so intertwined with it, right? So we start off with EFT, we're talking through a story using words, right? I woke up one morning, found my mother dead on the bathroom floor. Those words themselves are also stored inside. That story is stored inside. So if we use the EFT first, we're accessing inside of us through words, which is slightly different than accessing somewhere inside of us with the tension. They're different layers of the same thing. So I think it's most powerful to go through the different steps. And I know myself, I could not have gone to the third or the second step without doing the first.
That's good to know. And that's why I wanted to ask that question, because I'm sure you put the process in that order for a very specific reason. So don't try to reinvent the wheel, right? Follow this process. And if you find an evolution of this process that worked great for you, share that, right? So that's amazing. I've really loved this conversation, Anne. And I want to ask you, so for those who want to go deeper into these 3 steps, you have your book and the workbook that accompanies it that we can find on your website and Amazon, which will be in the description. For those listening, Anne's book is called A Pathway to Insight, and the workbook shares that same name. So what inspired you? At what point, maybe is a better question, at what point did you say, I need to put these teachings and learnings and my own experience into a book to share with people? At what point were you comfortable sharing this information with people? And how did you know that a book is how you wanted to share this process?
Well, it was obviously after I got to the place where I could put my awareness inside my body, because I'd never heard of anyone talking about this before. So I was also concerned that I would forget the intricacies of the steps, because there's kind of some weird things that might happen to the body as you go through this releasing process. And I wanted to share those as well, so that other people would be scared, or they would kind of understand the process more, this releasing, unwinding of the body process. So that's why I wanted to write it down in a book, because I said I hadn't written down in a diary, and I wish I had from the beginning. So if you're going to do this work, I recommend writing things in a diary, writing down what happens. But I didn't, so I wanted to write it in a book.
That's great. Congratulations on the launch of that book. I know it's a big ordeal putting a book together. It's one thing to talk about things. It's another thing to put them in a book, get the cover done, distribution, all those things. So for those who want to go deeper into these 3 steps, like I do, I'm curious more than ever. We could talk for 3 hours about these things, and it's only been 50 minutes. But for those who want to dive more into this, go to the description, grab a copy of Anne's book, A Pathway to Insight, so that you can dive deeper into these insights. And this was an awesome conversation. Again, I mentioned this before we recorded, but I commend you for the work that you decided to do on yourself, because you could have discovered these things and either not used them yourself, not shared them. I believe that it takes a very special person and leader to take what you've learned, become vulnerable to share it and help others, because I'm sure that this is a big part of your life, but you have other parts of your life as well. You still have 2 boys that are still in their stages of growing, and you're taking your time to go out there and share these teachings with the world. And for that, you make the world a better place. So I want to commend you for that. And I want to thank you for that and for being on the show today.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to tell you, I've got a lot of this information on my YouTube channel. A lot of the information is there. If you're not able to get hold of a book, you can go there and learn hopefully a lot as well.
Amazing. Cool. Links to the YouTube channel as well for Anne is in the description. And Anne, thank you very much again. It was great meeting you. And I can't wait maybe for round 2 on the podcast in the future.
Thank you. It was a great conversation.
Whether you've got large life events that have happened to you, or you might say have happened for you, that you are unsure of how to navigate, or you're unsure of whether they have left an imprint on you and your mind or your physical body, or both, then this conversation with Anne has left you with a 3-step process that you can begin using immediately for free. Even if you don't grab a copy of Anne's book, you can look up EFT. You can go to Anne's YouTube channel. You can really get started on this journey. And the earlier, the better. But listen, if you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and you're like, is it too late? It's not too late. You can always start this journey of self-discovery. You can always start to release these traumas. You can always start to place attention on your body in order to release tensions or release emotions that have been stored there for years and years and years. And I hope that this 3-step process that Anne shared, along with her own personal story, has helped you to take steps towards that reality for yourself. If it did, and if you took something away from this conversation, please share this show with just one other person who could use it as well, so it can help them too. Be sure to go to the description, grab a copy of Anne's book, check out her YouTube channel, and I'm going to include her website there as well for those who want to check that out. And again, thank you for being the best part of the Be Better team. And until we talk again next time, continue to be better.